So we've been talking a little bit about things like diets, different types of people. I know we have a unit on children and things like that. And so this next part of the next few units, we're going to be kind of covering some different aspects around those areas of nutrition. So topic 9 is talking about energy balance and healthy body weight. It's going to be talking a lot about obesity. Most people are not underweight. That's not usually an issue. We'll talk about that for a minute. But for the most part, we want to talk about healthy body weight and a little bit about what that means and those kind of things. And so we'll probably just kind of get into some introductory stuff today. I'm just looking at the clock. It looks like it's 11:20, so I've got half an hour to kind of talk about some of this stuff. And the other thing I wanted to say before we get into this stuff is just trying to think a little bit about this. So I've never been overweight in my life. I don't have firsthand experience really understanding what that is like. When you talk about things like body image, there's so much that could be said. And I kind of like the way that this guy had said it here. So that's what I wanted to kind of start off talking about this. The reality is that almost all of us are either currently thinking about our body, thinking we're too thin or too big, or at some point in your life, you are going to be doing that. I know I have so many people my age that look at me and they say, you seem to be so healthy and all those kind of things. But I can tell you that, I'm probably, let me see here, let me just think about this for a second. When I think about where I was when I was about 25, 30, I'm about 20 pounds more than I was at that. And I think about that a lot, right? Think about my habits and what I'm doing that, it's going to add up. And by the time I'm 65, where is my health going to be? And so I don't think anybody is immune to that kind of thing. And like I said, I want you to, not feel bad about yourself. Your body is your body. Sometimes, yes, you are part of the blame. Sometimes you are not. And when you're talking to people and you see people that are overweight, please don't blame them. Some people have glandular issues. Some people are going through mental health issues that's causing them to stress eat and those kind of things. Sometimes when people lose weight, they're actually losing weight because they're going through chemotherapy or something like that. That's another way to think about it. So I personally, this is just sort of my personal thing. I try not to comment on people's weight unless they mention it first, no matter what, because I do have a friend that lost a whole bunch of weight due to chemotherapy, and I didn't know she was going through cancer. And I'm really glad I didn't comment on that because I'm sure that would have made her not feel good about her whole situation. Anyway, so just wanted to say a little bit about that. And so we're going to talk a lot about weight for the next little bit here. So a little bit about weight. There are health risks if you're overweight or underweight. And it doesn't necessarily mean everybody is going to have those health risks. Some people can be what would be considered by many underweight or overweight, and they're actually very healthy. But kind of generally, if you're outside of certain ranges, there are more risks. And so this is something we want to talk about a little bit. There's lots of misconceptions about weight. We're going to talk about that in terms of, you could be a certain weight. And for one person of that height, that may be healthy, and another person of that height, it may not be. So sometimes the focus should be a bit more on not necessarily actual weight, but in terms of your body composition, how much fat you have, where is the fat being stored, those kind of things actually are bigger and better questions to think about it. There's a lot of focus on short-term solutions, and most of us need to be thinking about long-term solutions. And so we'll get into that, probably not necessarily today, but more next day. We'll talk a little bit more about behavior change and things like that. So let's talk a little bit about risks from being underweight. This was something that historically was a big deal. Many people were underweight. And so if you were going through a famine, you were the first to die. people with a little extra body fat, they're the ones that would survive through the famine or warfare and siege and things like that. These were big risks. People who are underweight, sometimes they're malnourished. They're not getting enough of something important in the diet. It can lead to all sorts of things that we've been talking about, like improper development of bones, improper brain development, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you're underweight, you may have a problem with being in the hospital. Sometimes when people undergo surgery or certain procedures, they're not getting food or very much food for several days. And so there's higher risks with those kind of things. And when people are underweight, sometimes they're more likely to die from cancer because some tumors consume energy like crazy. And so people who are underweight sometimes actually literally starve to death from the cancer that is taking the energy away from their body. And being underweight, by the way, can also contribute to heart disease. So there's lots of things that we could say about that, but that's kind of mostly what I'm going to say, because it's not a chronic problem in Canada. It's a very, very small percentage of people in Canada that would fall into this category. The big problem is, of course, being overweight or having obesity. And you can see this is a little time-lapse maps of Canada showing what percentage of people fall into that category of being obese. And you can see that over time it is increasing in various areas. There's lots of stats on these kind of things. You take a look at this one here. It's showing obesity rates in Canada. If you look at girls and boys, what we're looking at is this line here. It's the one that is on the increase from 1975 to 2016. So that is going up. And being underweight is going down. And so this is something that health experts are thinking about a lot and wondering what we can do. This is some data from 2017. I found this infographic in Stats Canada and shows a bunch of data from this. So from this infographic, they're saying that about 40% of us are in a normal weight. And the rest of us are over, either by little or a lot. So this is we're starting to call this the obesity epidemic. We've been talking about this now for a while. In the United States, that number is much higher, by the way, which is something that the Americans are even talking about more than the Canadians. This shows the provinces, which ones have more than the average and which ones have less. So Alberta is more than the average, and BC and Ontario are less. Somebody's got to be less, but that's where Alberta is. Obesity increases with age. As you get older, you can get more sedentary, and with that kind of thing, if you're getting more sedentary and you're eating the same amount of calories, you do eventually gain weight. Obesity does decrease with fruit and vegetable consumption. So that's good news. If you can increase the fruits and vegetables in your diets and cut out the junk, that's certainly going to help. But here's the thing, right? For many Canadians, what are your vegetables? Potatoes and tomatoes. Those are the most consumed vegetables in Canada by a large margin. And potatoes don't really have a ton of nutrients in them. They're mostly starch. And that's going to contribute to, if you're eating lots of them, you're not going to get the benefits of all those other vegetables you could be eating. Immigrants are less likely to be obese than non-immigrants. There was no explanation behind that, but I'm willing to believe that's true. And another interesting thing is it shows that with education, people are less likely to be obese. And there's definitely a socioeconomic thing that goes along with that. People with less education, just on average, tend to eat more processed foods, more fast foods, more things out of the box, like pre-prepared pizzas and things like that. And I'm not really sure why that is, but that does seem to be the case. There's certainly trends around. And the other thing, I think we talked about this a little bit before, was portion size and portion control. It's not so easy to do anymore. You go to any fast food restaurant and they're trying to offer you all these giant things. And it's so easy to upsize, so easy to pack in a lot of extra calories from these meals that you're getting at restaurants. You see, this is comparing 1950 to now, which was 2016 when this was published. And they're showing that things are much better. And now we're looking at a lot more calories in these fast foods that we're getting. Okay, so enough about that. Let's just talk a little bit about risks from being overweight and obese. If you take a look at this, we're going to talk about body mass index here in a few minutes, but you can see that this is considered the healthy place. So that's normal, around maybe 22 to 25 is kind of a normal body mass index. And as you get away from that normal healthy weight, your health risks increase. As you get to be more towards obese, you're more likely to suffer from hypertension, heart disease, type 2 diabetes. But the actual risks, huge list. You can see I've got blood cholesterol mentioned on there, but we're talking about abdominal hernias, arthritis, complications when you're pregnant, complications with surgery, arthritis, maybe I mentioned arthritis already, high blood lipids and blood cholesterol, kidney stones, liver problems, respiratory problems, sleep apnea, tons of things. Those are just some of the things I have written down or off the top of my head that are correlated with greater risk with greater body fatness. So this is a health concern, right? Thinking about these things. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean when we mean obesity and where some of the risks are in there. One of the biggest risks is where your fat is stored. Okay, so I think I talked about it before. In terms of fat in the body, there's really two main areas of fat. There's the subcutaneous fat. So this is the fat that you would feel when you're pinching, right? So you grab someone by the arm and you feel a little fat around, it's that around the muscle, right? The other kind of fat is that visceral fat. And often we're calling this belly fat. This is the thing that everybody hates. And many people get a little bit of fat on the belly. And I can say I'm not immune to this and I'm not happy about it. And this fat here actually has a higher risk of certain diseases. So you can see the big ones on there: diabetes, stroke, hypertension, heart disease. And so what's going on with that visceral fat? So it turns out that visceral fat, well, you can see it's accumulating kind of around the belly, but it's sort of in there around all those central organs, which is sometimes why it's called central fat or central obesity. And for some reason, I'm not really sure why this is, but that visceral fat does release lipids into the bloodstream much more rapidly than your subcutaneous fat. So, and when I say lipids, the biggest one we're concerned about are our lipoproteins, our LDL lipoproteins. And those are the ones that, of course, do lead to heart disease. And like I said, I don't really know why that is. That subcutaneous fat can release lipids as well. It's just much slower. And so it's that belly fat that we're concerned about. And this happens in a lot of people. And certain types of diets tend to contribute to it quite a bit. And the other thing about that visceral fat is sometimes people have a lot of it and they don't really know it. So take a look here at this man and this woman, right? The man could look relatively normal, or maybe he has a big chest. And so you can't tell that there is a lot of fat in the belly area. And you can see this is that visceral fat here, all this here, whereas the woman, it's a lot less. So sometimes people can be skinny, but have lots of fat in the wrong place. And that's not a good thing at all, right? So sometimes when people talk about the visceral fat or the belly fat, they talk about, are you apple-shaped or are you pear-shaped? It's kind of a funny thing to Google, by the way, because there's lots of fruits that are talked about and talking about the shape of the person's body, right? So who's likely to be apple-shaped? It's the apple shape that we're concerned about because it means you're rounder around the belly a bit more, right? And There are numerous studies that show that the apple shape is probably worse than the pear shape due to that belly fat. But if you are apple shaped, you know, don't have to worry all the time. It's kind of like a trend, it's a correlation, and you may or may not be at risk, right? So if you are apple shaped or if you're any shaped, I encourage everybody to have a healthy diet and stay active and those kind of things. But like I said, that's if you're changing shape and you're going towards more apple shape, this is what we're concerned about. You can see the pear shape, particularly is usually what we refer to with women. Women in their reproductive years, you know, they tend to have a little bit more hips and skinnier up top, and so you know that's for childbearing, right? And some women, when they hit menopause, they go rapidly from the pear shape to the apple shape, and those are the people that they're healthy, and then suddenly they're in a higher risk category because they've gained a lot of visceral fat. Men of all ages, but typically we're looking at greater than 35, 40, tend to get that apple shape if they're having good lifestyle. Particularly some fats in particular, you probably know there's the beer belly, right? You know, fat that's obtained from drinking lots of alcohol is not good for you. You're not looking at just visceral fat, but you're also looking at fatty liver, and there's actually compounding of problems. Smokers apparently as well have more visceral body fat. I didn't know that. I just was reading about it recently, and in actually multiple places that about smokers. And I guess, I don't know. I've never really taken a look at smokers to see if they have more bellies than the average person or not, but somebody obviously has done the research on that. So what is affecting that fat distribution? It's complicated. There's a lot of studies to try to understand this kind of thing. Certainly certain types of foods tend to lead to certain types of fats, particularly alcohol intake is the one that we know very well leads to visceral fat and fatty liver. Physical activity and smoking and menopause and those kind of things can really affect our fat distribution. Some of it is probably genetics, right? You know, some of us, you know, we come from a family of people that have, let's say, fat thighs or something like that, and it's just something you live with, right? You have a certain body shape because you've inherited it from your parents or your grandparents or whatever else. What I want to talk about a little bit, let me just see how we are doing for time. Might get through this, might not, we'll see. I want to talk a little bit about these indicators of obesity in terms of how we try to measure these things and how we try to determine, are you in a healthy range or are you not in a healthy range? And none of these can really be taken just on their own. Usually most of these things are just sort of, they're one indicator, and they may or may not necessarily reflect the truth around your health risk. One of the big ones you hear about is BMI, or body mass index. And this is one of these things that you see on all sorts of health sites. In fact, I'm willing to bet that the MyFitnessPal probably calculated your BMI in there. You see that all sorts of things. I have a Wii Fit at home that calculates my BMI, asks, weighs me and asks me what my height is and tells me whether I'm at a healthy range for my age and all those kind of things. But what is BMI? BMI is just the person's weight in kilograms divided by the square of their height in meters. Right? So let's say you're 75 kilograms and you are, let's say you're 1.5 meters, and that's how you calculate your BMI. It's very simple. Most of us don't know our weight in kilograms and meters. I do. I usually measure myself both metrically and non-metrically because I'm always curious. But generally, it doesn't tell you how much fat is in that person. It's just looking at your height versus your weight, and that's it. But generally, having an irregular BMI does usually correlate with poor health. So I'll show you, there's all sorts of charts you can find on the internet. A lot of BMI charts look something like this. And so you can see that individual I just mentioned, that's, what did I say, 75 kilograms and 1.5 meters. Okay, so that's about here. So that person would be considered moderately obese. And 1.5 meters is quite short, by the way. I'll show you a BMI calculator here in a moment. But anyway, you can see this is showing has both metric and non-metric on there. So you can look at these charts and sort of decide, where that you might classify. It may or may not necessarily be true for you, and I'll show you why that is in a moment. There's all sorts of BMI calculators on the internet. They're all using the same formula. If you do your weight in feet and your mass in pounds, it calculates it metrically for you. So let's check out this calculator here. I'm gonna just switch over to it. So here's a BMI calculator. It's not loading. What happened here? Oh, there we go. Okay, so I've already got this over here on metric. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to calculate my BMI. Okay, I'm not 179 meters, I'm 179 centimeters. So that means I'm 1.79 meters. And I just weighed myself the other day, and I'm going to share with you my weight. Haven't weighed myself in a few years. And so I was a little surprised. I was 78 kilograms. So I'm about 3 or 4 more kilograms than I thought I was, at least pre-pandemic. So I was not too happy about that. Hoping it's all muscle, but you never know. So let's see what happens when I calculate that. So it's telling me that I'm a 24.3. I would like to be better than that. Like I said, in terms of where I'm at, probably 10 years ago, I was 7 kilograms. So that's about 15 pounds heavier than I was about 10 years ago. And I'm not too happy about that, because I'm not sure much of it is muscle. Let's just say that. We'll go back to the PowerPoint here. If you take a look, so there I am on the PowerPoint, and I am in the healthy range, but moving towards the overweight range. And I know because I know my body, like I said, that I'm not necessarily gaining muscle. I've definitely been gaining a little bit of fat. And I'm hoping I can keep that under control for a few more decades would be nice. So here's kind of the Health Canada has a range, right? And so they tell you that, this is the normal BMI range for humans. And notice it doesn't say anything about being a woman or a man. They just have this range. So don't read everything into this. And notice I keep talking about muscle versus fat. That's something that's really important, and I'll get to that in a moment. But you can see these are the health categories. And as you get further away from the norm, you're more likely to be at a higher risk for all of those things that we talked about before: hypertension and heart disease and diabetes and whatnot. So here's the thing about BMI. You see a lot of people criticizing BMI, and you can see, for example, this man here on the left and the woman, they both weigh 260 pounds, and their BMI is 33.9. So the man clearly has been working out. And so, there's a lot of athletes, particularly people who are building muscle, tend to have a high BMI, but it doesn't mean they're unhealthy necessarily. And because muscle is heavy. And so, so these people, BMI doesn't necessarily represent a proper range. Another group, of course, would be pregnant or lactating women. If you're pregnant, you're carrying a whole nother human with you. If you're lactating, you often have extra mass due to your breast milk, and can be a lot of extra weight that's on your body. It doesn't necessarily mean you're in an unhealthy range. BMI is not necessarily accurate for people that are extremely tall or extremely short, probably not that great for children. Adults over 65, because these BMI values are based on younger people, right? They're based on your sort of your average 25-year-old healthy adult. So the further you get away from that, the less likely BMI is to be a good indicator. Take a look at the ladies on the right, both 60 kilograms. And you know what? They're both in a normal category, these two women, right? One is obviously more lean and maybe muscular. But it doesn't mean that the lady on the left is less healthy. she's probably in a normal BMI level. So just something to think about if your BMI is outside of that range. And something that a lot of people do that are trying to work towards being healthy is they go work out and they start gaining muscle mass. And so their BMI looks even worse. and that's another problem, right? So sometimes gaining muscle is not necessarily a bad thing. So just always read it with a grain of salt. So sometimes what's more important is actual fat content, right? And I said, particularly, we're looking at the belly fat. It's kind of hard to measure fat unless you're going to, disassemble the entire body. But there are a bunch of different methods. You can see some of them are here. I don't know if anybody here has ever gone through this process here with these little these fat pinching clamp things. It's called the fat fold method or anthropometry. And what they do is these little calipers, they measure, they basically pinch your flesh in various parts of the body. So I think when I had it done, it was on the belly, different places on the arms, and I'm trying to remember where else. We did it in high school for one of my classes, and you can measure the amount of, and then you put it in a chart, and it gives you an estimate of your body fat. So if you're some sort of athlete, you may have had this experience with your sport. Often it's just done for fun because most athletes are actually in a pretty healthy range, particularly if you're quite competitive. There's other methods, conductivity, that's putting electricity through the body, and fat compared to other tissues has a different, carries electrical current in a different way. So it's another way to measure it. There's methods where you're looking at body density. So you're being put into a tank, and they're looking at your weight, and then the tank of water measures your volume. And that gives you an idea of your body density. And other methods, you can see this X-ray method. I'm not too familiar with that one. But again, it has something to do with the density of fat versus other tissues can be measured quite well. So this is something that sometimes is important to understand, how much fat you have and where that fat is. Another metric that's done in a lot of places that is very simple is just looking at waist circumference. So remember, we were talking about that apple shape? Measuring your waist. So usually when you measure your waist, by the way, you're standing up and you're above your hips, usually roughly where your belly button is. And so generally, again, this is not necessarily always the trend. Some people are just big humans. I have a nephew who is 6'2", and if he was standing across the street, you wouldn't know he was tall. He's just big in all dimensions. And imagine his waist is probably quite large, and you would never know it until you walk up close to him. But again, this is kind of one of those guidelines you see in a lot of places. You see them on nutrition charts or places that are asking you to assess your health. And again, they're trying to look at that belly fat because that's one of the things we're concerned about for our health. Okay, I'm just going to finish off on this slide here because this is sort of the last indicator of looking at your risk for obesity. And this isn't looking at any measurements of your body, but this is looking at other indicators that are often correlated with having excess body fat. So having cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, sleep apnea, those are always way more common in people that are overweight or obese. So usually if you have one of those things, that actually may be a crucial or critical medical thing. These other things on the bottom of the list, usually they're looking at all in combination. Do you have 3 of these things or more? Then we might be concerned and need to treat you for your weight. So I guess we're out of time. I'm going to finish off there and wrap it up. There's a lot more that we're going to say about this, and like I said, I don't want people to feel bad about their body image. I think we all can do better with our health. Some of us, may need medical treatment for our conditions, and it's not necessarily your fault. But we should all strive to do what we can to better ourselves. Anyway, that's all for today. Happy Friday. Hoping for warmer weather tomorrow. Please let there be warmer weather tomorrow. I'd really love to get out. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.